In times of rapid change, illusions become more valuable than truth, but only to those who choose not to look deeper. I did not enter this experiment looking for quick cash. I was looking for information about how modern labor is being reshaped, rebranded, and repackaged under the illusion of opportunity. I tried 5 of the most popular side hustles today, not as a consumer of hype, but as an analyst of reality. What I found wasn't just surprising, it was revealing, because when you examine what's being sold to the masses as financial freedom, what you often find is a new form of dependency concealed under the language of entrepreneurship. Not all money is created equal. This is a truth obscured by the speed of transactions and the noise of popular culture. In a world where numbers dominate perception, we are conditioned to treat every dollar as identical to the next. But beneath the surface, there is a profound difference between money earned through insight and money earned through exhaustion, between capital that multiplies and capital that decays with time. Fast money is often celebrated. Social media elevates stories of overnight success, instant profits, viral wins, but rarely is there discussion of durability, of consequence, or of risk. The nature of how money is generated matters more than how quickly it appears. Some forms of income are the product of leverage systems, platforms, intellectual property. Others are simply the result of raw effort, finite, linear, and non-scalable. This distinction is critical because it determines not just short-term cash flow, but long-term freedom. Consider the difference between money earned from a delivery shift versus money from licensing a digital asset. One demands continuous input to sustain output. The other detaches time from value. When your income depends on your constant presence, you are not building wealth, you are renting your energy. The moment you stop, the money stops. That is not freedom, that is fragility. It is easy to be seduced by velocity, the idea that fast income equals smart income, but this is an illusion crafted by a culture that glorifies the appearance of success. In truth, the fastest money often comes with the shortest lifespan. It solves today's problems by postponing tomorrow's. It's transactional, not transformational. Money generated without strategy often reinforces dependence. For example, someone working 3-gig economy jobs may be earning more in the moment than someone building a small online brand. But over time, the gig worker's body depletes, their options narrow, and their leverage disappears. Meanwhile, the brand builder, even if initially earning less, is constructing a foundation that eventually pays them while they sleep. One path is linear, the other exponential. The difference is not visible immediately, but over years it becomes undeniable. Furthermore, money that is reactive, earned as a response to crisis, trapped individuals in cycles of anxiety. Contrast this with money that is proactive, money that emerges from positioning, from anticipating trends before they become obvious. The latter is not just more stable, it is strategic. It builds insulation from volatility. It allows for agency and, in many cases, influence. Because in this world, capital is not just a means of exchange, it is a form of power. This is not a moral argument. It is a structural one. The system rewards asymmetry. If you are earning in a model where your output is linear, your ceiling is imposed by time. If you earn through asymmetric upside, where a single correct insight can yield outsized results, then you are operating in a different dimension of opportunity. That is why the source of income is not a trivial detail. It determines whether your trajectory is upward, flat, or decaying. Two people may earn the same amount in a week, but if one does so by exchanging time and the other by deploying code, media, or capital, the implications diverge dramatically. This truth becomes even more apparent during periods of economic stress, when inflation rises, when markets wobble, when institutions crack. The kind of income you have determines whether you adapt or collapse. Durable income built from intellectual property, systems, scalable assets tends to survive. Income based solely on hours worked tends to suffer. It is not enough to make money. One must understand its origins, its dependencies, its trajectory. Just as investors assess risk-adjusted return, individuals must assess time-adjusted income. The real metric is not how much did I earn, but how much of this will continue without me. We are living in a time where speed is mistaken for success, and noise is mistaken for knowledge. But those who look deeper, who distinguish between income that expands and income that extracts, will position themselves not just for wealth, but for resilience. In the end, money is not just a tool, it is a signal. And if you listen carefully, it reveals the truth about your systems, your strategy, and ultimately, your sovereignty. There is a fundamental error in how most people approach income. They equate hard work with value creation. This belief is not only outdated, it is dangerous. In the modern economy, labor without leverage is little more than sanctioned inefficiency. It may provide survival, but never true autonomy. Those who understand this truth begin to shift from effort-based strategies to systems-based strategies. They stop measuring success in hours worked and begin measuring it in impact achieved without presence. The mythology of labor is deeply rooted in cultural narratives, stories passed down to justify struggle, to romanticize sacrifice, but these stories often serve the status quo, not the individual. They celebrate effort because it is visible, easy to quantify, and socially praised. Leverage, on the other hand, operates quietly. It is the invisible engine behind real power, unseen by most, misunderstood by many, but essential to those who move systems rather than work within them. Labor is finite, no matter how skilled or dedicated a person may be. Their physical and mental energy is exhaustible. There are only so many hours in a day, and even fewer in which a person can perform at peak capacity. This natural ceiling is the greatest limitation imposed on those who rely solely on labor. In contrast, leverage breaks this ceiling. It introduces scale where there was none. It allows one idea, one action to affect thousands or millions without additional effort. The same keystroke that creates a line of code for one person can serve an entire population. The same article, the same video, the same formula repeated, shared, monetized. The distinction is not philosophical, it is structural. An individual working 14-hour days will never outpace a system that compounds value automatically. The person who builds a tool that replaces their own labor has effectively multiplied their output without multiplying their exhaustion. This is not laziness, it is intelligent, strategic use of asymmetry in a world that still teaches symmetry. Some confuse this with privilege, assuming that leverage is only available to those with capital. But capital is only one form of leverage. Others include code, media, data, distribution, and brand. Each of these allows for disproportionate return on effort. The content creator who uploads once but earns forever. The developer who builds a platform that automates decisions. The entrepreneur who designs a funnel that scales without manual intervention. These individuals are not working harder. They are working beyond themselves. Even within traditional labor roles, there are opportunities to inject leverage. The consultant who packages knowledge into a course, the teacher who licenses their content, the designer who creates templates instead of responding to one-off requests. The common thread is this: transition from a model where your presence is required to one where your presence becomes optional. Optionality is the currency of freedom. Of course, this transition is not immediate. It demands foresight, discipline, and delayed gratification, qualities that are increasingly rare in a world optimized for dopamine, not development. But those who resist the lure of instant validation, those who invest in building rather than reacting, find themselves operating in a different league altogether. They are not faster horses in a race, they are on entirely different tracks. There is also a deeper implication here. When a society rewards leverage disproportionately, those without it are left with only their time to trade, and time is the one asset that, once spent, cannot be recovered or scaled. This creates not just economic disparity but structural immobility. The more people remain tethered to labor without leverage, the more vulnerable they become to inflation, to health issues, to technological disruption. And so leverage becomes not just a tool of advancement, but a shield against decline. This is why education alone is no longer sufficient. One must learn not just to think, but to compound, not just to earn, but to design systems that earn independently. The mind must shift from input-output thinking to nonlinear models, where the right input, correctly positioned, triggers exponential output. At the highest levels of economics and geopolitics, leverage is everywhere. A currency adjustment, a trade agreement, a software update. Each has the power to move billions without a single drop of sweat. That same principle, applied at the individual level, transforms not only income, but influence. Because true influence is not a function of visibility, it is a function of control. In the final analysis, labor is the beginning, leverage is the evolution. Those who fail to make that transition will forever be trading energy for survival. Those who succeed will trade strategy for sovereignty. And in that space between action and amplification, true wealth is born. What passes today for independence is, in many cases, a carefully constructed illusion. The rise of the gig economy, the proliferation of side hustles, and the democratization of digital tools have given birth to a narrative that anyone anywhere can become their own boss, but the reality is more nuanced and far less liberating than it appears. When you look beneath the surface, what emerges is not freedom, but a new architecture of dependence, one cloaked in the language of entrepreneurship. The modern worker, armed with a smartphone and a Wi-Fi connection, is told that they have control. They can choose their hours, their clients, their pace. The branding is seductive, freedom on demand, but examine the mechanics more closely and a different picture emerges. These platforms, ride-sharing, delivery services, freelance marketplaces do not grant autonomy, they shift risk. They offload responsibility from institutions onto individuals, all while maintaining the structural imbalance of power. The individual is celebrated for their hustle, but left alone to deal with volatility. Income fluctuates unpredictably. There is no safety net, no employer-sponsored insurance, no guaranteed progression. The very tools that promise empowerment are optimized to extract maximum labor with minimal accountability. Algorithms dictate availability, pricing, and performance. And yet, the worker is told they are free. This is not independence. It is decentralization of control without decentralization of power. In traditional employment, at least the hierarchy is clear. One knows who holds the authority, who signs the check, who sets the rules. In the gig economy, those hierarchies are hidden behind interfaces. The platform becomes the employer without the obligations of one. The worker becomes an entrepreneur without the benefits of ownership. It is the worst of both worlds: responsibility without power, labor without leverage. This is not to say the previous systems were ideal, far from it. But what has replaced them in many sectors is a structure that incentivizes constant movement without meaningful progress. Hustling becomes a permanent state, not a transitional phase. When you are always chasing the next task, the next client, the next payment, you do not build, you react. And reaction is the antithesis of strategic independence. The illusion is maintained by visibility. Social platforms reward the optics of freedom, the cafe laptop, the flexible schedule, the digital nomad lifestyle. But behind the filter is often financial insecurity, burnout, and existential drift. When identity is tied to productivity, and productivity is tied to an algorithm, what remains of the self? There is a deeper irony here. As technology has made true independence more technically feasible through low-cost distribution, automation, and access to markets, it has also created more opportunities for dependency masquerading as liberation. What differentiates the truly independent from the performatively free is not the absence of a boss, but the presence of a system they control. Independence is not the ability to pick your next task. It is the ability to choose whether or not to do tasks at all, because your income, your value, your identity are no longer tied to immediate execution. This distinction is invisible to the casual observer, but decisive over time. Those who build systems, brands, platforms, assets that produce ongoing value, acquire actual independence. Those who only participate in other people's systems are granted temporary access, but remain replaceable, and anything replaceable is, by definition, not sovereign. There is also a political dimension to this illusion, a population that believes it is free while operating under conditions of high instability is less likely to demand structural reform. The gig economy becomes not just an economic model, but a pacification tool, channeling frustration into productivity, turning insecurity into endless motion. People are too busy surviving to question the architecture of their survival. Break free from this illusion requires more than awareness. It requires design, intentional construction of income sources that operate independently of constant labor, ownership of assets that grow in value without direct involvement, control over distribution, branding, and strategy. These are not gifts, they are outcomes of aligned decisions over time, and they are rarely visible during the initial phase, which is why so few pursue them and so many settle for the mirage. The most dangerous prisons are the ones we do not recognize as prisons. A job with no boss is still a cage if the door only opens when an algorithm says so. Independence is not granted by flexibility, it is earned through control. And until we understand that, we will continue mistaking movement for freedom and mistaking permission for power. The world often appears chaotic, random movements, unpredictable shifts, sudden ruptures that defy logic, but chaos is rarely without structure. Beneath the noise there are patterns. They do not shout, they whisper, and those who train themselves to listen, to observe without distraction, to decode what is not immediately visible, those individuals begin to see the architecture behind the motion. The truth in most systems is not found in isolated events, but in recurring behaviors. Patterns are not coincidences, they are signals. Most people react to circumstances. They interpret each event as singular, disconnected from what came before. A market crash, a sudden surge in a trend, a collapse in trust. These are viewed as shocks, but shocks are only surprising to those who are not paying attention to the sequence. For those who recognize the recurring rhythm of systems, economic, political, social, the outcome is often predictable, perhaps not in timing, but in structure. In the context of income, opportunity, and economic behavior, the same principle applies. A side hustle that seems promising on the surface often mirrors previous models. The terms change, the interface evolves, the marketing adapts, but the underlying mechanics remain constant. Whether it's freelance platforms, gig apps, or digital arbitrage, most operate on extraction. The value flows upward, not outward. Identifying this pattern early enables strategic positioning. It allows one to shift from participation to design. Consider the gig economy's evolution. First wave was sold as empowerment, be your own boss. The second wave added data and gamification. The third wave now integrates AI and dynamic pricing. But what remains unchanged? The asymmetry. The individual bears the risk. The platform captures the margin. When you track the evolution of these models, not by marketing language but by financial flow, the truth becomes obvious. What appears new is often just more refined manipulation. Patterns also reveal themselves in human behavior. Scarcity, fear, greed, these are not random forces. They are consistent, predictable, and cyclical. Entire industries are built on these psychological reflexes. For instance, panic buying, speculative bubbles, and irrational brand loyalty all follow recognizable arcs. Once you understand that these emotional surges repeat, you begin to step back. You stop responding. You start anticipating. This applies not only to markets, but also to personal decision making. Most individuals repeat the same cycles: overwork, short-term gains, burnout, reset. They seek novelty, hoping it will bring change, but they bring the same mindset into each new opportunity. The pattern is internal, not external. Until it is recognized, nothing truly shifts. Strategy does not begin with ambition, it begins with awareness. To see clearly, one must detach from noise. And to detach from noise, one must cultivate discipline, mental, informational, emotional. Patterns are not only descriptive, they are predictive. In the long arc of time, they indicate where systems are headed. Those who understand them gain leverage not by acting faster, but by acting sooner. It is not about speed, it is about timing. Acting before consensus, before the market catches up, before narratives solidify. That window between recognition and reaction is where outsized gains are made, but pattern recognition is not instinctive. It requires deliberate observation and, more importantly, skepticism, the willingness to question what is accepted, to interrogate what is familiar. Most people do not do this because it is uncomfortable, it disrupts narratives, it challenges identity, but comfort is rarely aligned with truth. This is why real insight is rare, not because the data is hidden, but because most are unwilling to see what the data implies. They look for confirmation, not contradiction, but patterns are clearest when you examine what doesn't fit. An anomaly is often the beginning of a signal. The pattern does not emerge from what is obvious. It emerges from what recurs in subtle, persistent form. This skill, seeing patterns where others see noise, is the foundation of all strategic advantage. In finance, in geopolitics, in personal economics, it is how asymmetry is created. It is how capital flows are anticipated, how market inefficiencies are exploited, how trends are spotted before they become trends. Truth, ultimately, is not what is declared. It is what repeats. When you begin to see what others overlook, not because it is hidden, but because it is mundane, you begin to step out of the reactive economy and into the predictive one. And those who can predict quietly and consistently are not merely surviving. They are shaping the future before others even realize it has arrived. The story we're sold is simple: hustle hard, stay hungry, outwork everyone. The implication is that success is the product of relentless effort, of motion without pause. It is the creed of modern ambition, a belief system that rewards visible struggle more than quiet strategy. But when you strip away the narrative and study what actually creates sustainable income, what builds freedom, what compounds over time, the truth becomes clear. The hustle that worked wasn't about the hustle at all. In the pursuit of fast money, most gravitate toward action, endless activity, task after task, platform after platform. The energy is admirable, but often misdirected. Motion gives the illusion of progress, but without leverage, that motion is circular. What feels like momentum is often just velocity without destination. The effort is real, but the structure is broken. When I tested 5 different side hustles, each one promised rapid results, and some delivered temporarily. Freelancing yielded immediate cash. Reselling goods moved quickly. Running ads on digital platforms brought spikes of income, but the results were inconsistent, dependent on constant input, and vulnerable to algorithms. Shifts, pricing volatility, and burnout. The faster I moved, the more I realized I was building a treadmill, not a vehicle. It was only when I stopped chasing the hustle itself, when I began to study the underlying systems, that I saw what differentiated those who earned once from those who earned repeatedly. The ones who won weren't moving faster. They had simply positioned themselves better. They weren't hustling harder. They had built machines that did the hustling for them. In one case, I shifted from doing freelance design work to creating templates that could be sold again and again. Same skill, different structure. One model required my time for every transaction. The other separated time from value. The income didn't skyrocket immediately, but it decoupled from my presence. That was the beginning of actual independence. Another example: rather than arbitraging goods and competing on razor-thin margins, I built a simple digital resource based on problems I had already solved. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even original, but it solved a real problem, and because it addressed a recurring need, it kept selling quietly, predictably, without me needing to be in room. This is the pattern. The hustle that worked was not loud. It was not frenetic. It did not require me to work more hours or learn more platforms. It required me to understand systems, to recognize that in every economy there are builders and there are laborers. The builder creates infrastructure, the framework through which value flows. The laborer performs within that framework, always trading time for cash. Most hustles people pursue are labor-intensive, delivering food, managing short-term gigs, flipping products. There is dignity in all of it, but not leverage, and without leverage, there is no escape from the cycle. You earn, you spend, you start again. You hustle not because you want to, but because you have no alternative. That is not freedom. That is dependency with better branding. What changed the game was not more hustle, but the ability to step back, analyze, and construct, to ask, what can I build once that delivers value many times? What can I automate, document, or delegate? Where does demand already exist? And how can I position myself at the point of recurring need? This mindset shift requires discipline. It means rejecting the dopamine rush, fast results in favor of long-term stability. It means choosing boredom over busyness. It means building processes that do not need applause, but that continue working even when attention fades. And it's not about scale for its own sake. It's about detachment, creating income that is not emotionally or physically tethered to your every waking hour, because real wealth is not how much you make. It's how little of yourself you need to spend to keep making it. The hustle that worked did not feel like hustle. It felt like clarity. It felt like patience. It felt like building something that did not need to be rebuilt each day, and in a culture obsessed with grinding, that is the ultimate subversion. To earn without chasing, to move without rushing, to win without shouting. In the end, it's not about working more. It's about understanding more, and once you do, the hustle becomes irrelevant because you've built something that works while you don't. Markets are not driven by reality, they are driven by perception. The same is true for labor. We are told to hustle, to grind, to work harder. But real power comes not from effort, it comes from insight. And in this era, the person who understands the system earlier than others doesn't just profit, they reshape the game for everyone else. So the next time you hear a pitch about a fast way to make money, ask yourself, is this freedom, or is this just a faster treadmill? Because if you don't design your own leverage, someone else will design your labor.